Before we get into today's stories, visit dreadsarmy.com to sign up for the Dread Weekly newsletter so you don't miss out on any updates. Also, check out all of the channels in the Dread Network on dreadsarmy.com or in the description below. Thanks for listening. Now let's get to the stories. I went on a camping trip with my two best friends from college. It was the weekend after graduation, and we wanted to do one last thing together before heading off to opposite ends of the country. It was just going to be a simple 2-night stay at a local park. The park itself was highly trafficked and well maintained. Its main attraction was a swimming beach. This wasn't some remote backcountry wilderness area. It was a state park, a normal state park. Nothing bad was supposed to happen, so it didn't even enter our minds to be nervous. We got there on a Friday night. The campground was less than half a mile from the parking lot. They had carts at the lot we could use to carry our things to the site. We had camp set up in less than an hour. Everything was going perfect. All these stories I've heard of people running into bad things in the woods, they all start with someone feeling something is off and ignoring it. That wasn't the case with us. There were no warning signs. It was nearly dark that first night, and we all famished, but we decided to go for a quick swim at the beach first. Most of the daytime beachgoers had cleared out by that time. By the time the sun set, we had the beach to ourselves. Nothing there felt odd or out of place. However, just as we were leaving, all three of us saw a white light across the lake. At first, it looked like the moon's reflection off the still waters of the lake. We all stopped what we were doing to watch this light, almost as if we were in some sort of trance. Clouds passed over the moon, hiding it from view, and yet the light was still there, gleaming off the water. The longer I stared at it, the more I wanted to figure out its cause. I started walking toward the lake, but my friend stopped me. She asked what I was doing, and I told her honestly, I don't know. I don't know why I did that. The longer I stared at the light, the more I was drawn towards it. That was the point. I should have known something was wrong, but I didn't. I never felt that I was in the presence of something evil. My friend figured it must be some sort of optical illusion and said as much. We agreed and went back to the campsite. We made dinner over the campfire, and the situation with the light fell to the back of my mind. I still wondered what it was, but it wasn't as all-consuming as when I was watching it at the lake. We all had a really fun night at the campsite. It had rained overnight, but our tents held up. There was a bit of standing water around various parts of the campground. I didn't notice it until I went for a walk around that morning and stumbled upon a fairly substantial pool right in the middle of the path. The water almost looked black, and in the center of the pool was the light. The same light we saw in the lake the night before. I knew then that the light was beneath the water and not a reflection of something above. I ran back to the campsite to get my friends and show them the pool. The only problem was that when I brought them to the area, it was just a normal pool of water. It was clear, not black, and there was no light floating around inside. I shrugged off the strange experience and we went for our morning hike. Again, we had a perfectly normal day. We hiked nearly 8 miles in total, had a nice picnic lunch, and made another great dinner over the campfire. We elected not to go to the beach that night. It was around 3 a.m. Sunday morning, the final day of the trip, when I awoke to someone screaming in the woods. I jumped up and climbed out of my tent. It was my friend. She was having a nightmare. I should mention that this friend sometimes has night terrors and talks in her sleep. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. I was almost relieved when I realized it was her, and not someone being harmed. We woke her up and kept her calm while she came to the realization she was having another night terror and that nothing was wrong. I made some coffee with the camp stove, and we all sat up together in my tent. I asked her what her dream was about, and she just looked at me with dead eyes and said, "There's something in the water. Don't follow it." I asked her to elaborate, but she either couldn't or wouldn't. We tried going back to sleep, but none of us were able to. I wanted to ask more about the thing in the water, but I didn't want to further traumatize my friend. In all probability, it was just a bad dream. There was nothing to be afraid of. Despite all of us being tired that morning, we went for another hike and had another good day in the park. We had an early dinner and started to pack up our camp and haul everything to the car. We had underestimated the amount of time it would take to get everything loaded, and it was nearly dark that day before we were ready to leave. We had to drive past the lake on the way out of the park. When we passed by the lake, I got sick all of a sudden. Really sick. Like I had to pull over because I thought I was going to vomit. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I felt better. But then I looked to the lake. There was that white light again. It was dancing beneath the surface of the lake. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was like I was paralyzed. The light seemed to elongate like a snake and slithered from the far end of the lake towards the beach. When it got to land, it threw itself upon the earth. It looked like a pool of liquid at that point, like what moonlight would be if you could catch it in a bottle. The liquid stared, moving, like it was going to change form or become something else. I felt a hand grab my arm and pull me back into the car. It was my friend. "I told you, don't follow it," she said, and we left. I never went back to that park, and I never figured out what the light was. I asked my friend who had the dream about it, and she would only tell me that it was evil. That was it. I work in the real estate business and have been flipping houses for about 2 years now. Although I've seen a lot of weird stuff over the years in basements of our houses, I've never seen anything quite like this. And I wanted to write into you because maybe your viewers would have some idea of what is going on in this home on Long Island. So this house is very old. I think it dates back to around the late 1800s. The style is a typical Queen Anne, with high-pitched roofs, a large wraparound porch, old decorative shutters, gorgeous wood trim, and massive stained glass windows. The whole house is actually in great shape for its age. In fact, it's almost like the house hasn't aged at all. The previous owners were a couple in their 90s, who both died in the master bedroom on the very same day. I obviously found that unusual, but didn't think much about it at this point. They didn't have any kids or other family, so unfortunately the house ended up for auction. In these auctions, they don't show photos of the inside of the home, only the outside. It's a risk, but I wanted to bet on it. So I put in my best bid, and I won. I was planning on doing a complete overhaul and renovation. Many houses in the house flipping business are foreclosures. They usually haven't been well maintained by their owners and typically have garbage thrown about, windows broken, doors off their hinges, and sometimes even graffiti all over the place. You know the type. We flippers go into these old houses with boarded up windows and make them look beautiful, or at least nice enough for a young family to move into. Usually, at a minimum, the kitchen and bathrooms need to be completely gutted and redone. The bedrooms usually need carpets ripped up and replaced with hardwood. The light fixtures need to be replaced. However, none of this was the case at this old manor. When we opened the front door, it was like it was frozen in time. Nearly every surface was spotless and in great condition. The kitchen had a working gas stove, a refrigerator that worked, and a shiny, clean sink. I just couldn't believe my eyes when I opened up the toilet seat to see perfectly clean white porcelain. Now, I knew that the couple had died in that house, but I didn't know the circumstances. When I opened up the door to the master bedroom, however, I found out exactly what had happened. The entire attic had collapsed down into the bedroom. It was a terrible sight. I could look up through the ceiling since the floorboards were open wide, and I could see all the way to the roof. And there was a whole mess all throughout that room. But I decided to look at it as positively as I could, and figured that we'd just make the fixed master bedroom have high vaulted ceilings. I carried on with the renovation as planned, but the whole time we were having the weird troubles. When we'd try to unscrew something, we'd turn around and the screw would be back in place. When we tried to paint the walls in the hallway, our paintbrushes would go missing. Every little job and project that we try to accomplish seemed to have a problem. When we removed the stove to replace it with a new stainless steel model, my friend who was helping me started getting a terrible cough and could barely carry it out of the room. Once we got outside the threshold of the room, though, his cough just stopped. Some of my crew were saying they were hearing weird noises. My friend was working in the bathroom when he heard someone laughing behind him. He thought it was another member of the crew, but when he turned around, no one was there. He walked out into the hallway, but no one was there either. Then, He walked outside only to see that everyone else was out there, eating lunch. No one had been in the house for at least 30 minutes. The next day, the landscapers came to lay out some new shrubbery. We didn't tell any of them about what had been going on, didn't want to spook them. But the next day at lunch, they came up to us acting fake mad that we were pranking them. Apparently their tools were lost, and they couldn't find them. I mean, it was only 2 shovels, but it was enough to delay their work. We promised them we didn't take the shovels, and eventually somebody did find them upstairs in the bedroom. No one confessed to moving them, so we were all confused as to how they could have gotten up there. So, it came to be that I didn't like being in the house any longer than I had to, and we started making quick work with the remaining renovations. My main concern was whoever moved in there next, and how they would experience the house. I recently found out that the original owners, the elderly couple, had been discussing selling the home in favor of a condo down south. Apparently, just the day before they got killed by the collapsing attic, they had been looking on Zillow and sending links to their friends. I don't want to be too spooked and sound too strange, but maybe the house heard them. I just think it was odd that that attic collapsed after all those years. I think maybe something in that house doesn't want to change. Or maybe the house itself didn't want the new gadgets installed. It's just too weird. Well, we're finishing up renovations this week, and it'll be on the market in about 2 weeks' time. I'm hoping all goes well at the open house and for the new owners. I'll keep you updated if anything changes. Getting my diving certification has to be one of my proudest moments. It also led to one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. Despite having all the safety gear and precautions in place, I couldn't have prepared for this discovery. Recently, I had the opportunity to visit Indonesia. In Indonesia, there are many dive locations, ranging from popular to little known. I did some research and chose to explore the ancient seabeds. The spot is well known to the locals. They swim and wash there. But beneath the surface, a limestone bedrock housing fossils of sea life that is 100,000 years old. It was an opportunity to visit ancient coral and caves galore. My dive team consisted of 4 experienced divers. We were all incredibly excited. We had all the precautions in place, and we planned to set out on our expedition early in the morning. I couldn't wait to get out there. I hardly slept the night before from the anticipation. I had my lights, my guideline, and equipment all ready. I was loading up to travel when my diving partner called to tell me he couldn't make it. He had been vomiting the night before. Normally, divers pair up for safety, but we now had an uneven number. I had the most dive experience, so I would go solo, but my plan was to stay near the others in case something went wrong. I had no idea how wrong it would really go, how it would change my overview of diving in the future, and the fact that I can never unsee what I saw in those caves. The initial dive itself was pretty stellar. Everything went well, and we found exactly what we had been hoping to see. But when I delved deeper into the crags and canyons below, I came across a dark, dry cave. I broke the #1 rule. While the other divers explored some of the coral on the walls, I turned down a different section and discovered a cave. It was enormous at the opening, but it funneled down smaller and smaller. I managed to squeeze through and came into a big open space. It was mostly dry with some pits maybe 3 feet deep. Because could stand, I got my filming equipment ready and shot some footage. I kept hearing clicking, scratching above the sounds of the water outside, but they were indistinguishable as to what direction they were coming from. All sounds reverberate in a cave. It was beautiful inside, all the grooves and cuts in the walls from the flowing water over centuries. I remember standing back and taking it all in. This was unlike anything I had ever seen on a dive. I felt like I was hiking a cavern in the Midwest. There were jagged stalagmites I had to navigate around. Some of the stalactites nearly reached the floor, they hung so low. It looked like an ice castle. It was glorious. I shot photos and footage for a long time, hoping to show just how beautiful and enormous this cave really was. I heard scratching right above me and clicks. I swore I saw movement, but when I jerked my camera upward, it went crashing to the cavern floor. A stalactite narrowly missed my face. Something had jarred it loose. My very expensive photo equipment lay shattered on the ground at my feet. I didn't have much time to mourn its loss. Something was moving on the ceiling. Fearing the worst, I attempted to scoop up the remains of the camera. If that giant calcium salt icicle came down from water pressure, this cave could become flooded very fast. Water began to pool around me. It was ankle deep in no time at all. It was silently seeping down from above me. I needed to get out. My carelessness about leaving my group and need for adventure had put me in a life or death situation. I started to panic. Everything around me looked the same: calcium crystals, muddy water. I couldn't remember which way I had come in. I saw movement above me once again and heard clicking. Another massive stalactite fell behind me. I looked up. Something was crawling on the ceiling. I caught it out of the corner of my eye as it scrambled behind a mass of crystal. I stupidly said, "Hello," but my voice was muffled from my equipment and fear dragging a lump down my throat. A huge chunk of the ceiling fell just feet from me. That got me in gear. I needed to get out. I needed to find the exit I had squeezed through. I made my way to the wall and started looking for the hole I came in through. Something was moving on the massive ceiling above me. When I looked up, I immediately stumbled back. This thing, this naked-looking thing on four legs, was clinging to the wall. It was pale and covered in veins. My light found it, and I fell to the floor. Its face looked gaunt and horrible. There was a gaping hole of a mouth and big black eyes. I screamed. I screamed and choked on my own breath. The creature began to descend down the wall with lightning speed. It was coming toward me, clicking and scraping huge trails down the wall as it moved. It moved so fast. Chunks of calcium were raining down on me as I felt around on the wall looking for the way out. The creature was maybe 20 feet away. It looked incredibly human, but insane and horrifying. Somehow, I found the hole in the wall I had come through. I squeezed through it. I stumbled into the pool and swam for my life, back to the boat. I have swam with sharks. I have jumped out of airplanes. But I have never been so scared in my life. That thing, it wasn't human. I honestly don't know what it was, and I don't really want to think about it at all anymore. I'm a dog catcher, and yes, the job is even less glamorous than it sounds. But really, there isn't a dog out there that I can't catch. I've been doing this kind of work long enough that I've uncovered all of the tools of the trade. I know how to read an animal's body language. I know when to use sedation and when a soft word alone will do the trick. Since I live in a small community, most of the animal control calls come my way. There isn't a big team taking shifts. It's me when your cat's stuck in a tree, and it's me when your dog takes a chunk out of the mailman. I guess I work with more than just dogs, huh? Maybe I should start introducing myself in a different way. What I wanted to illustrate was that my profession is in animals. A dog, a cat, a turtle, sure. I can handle those kinds of things. What my profession did not prepare me for, however, was monsters. This is the part when you laugh. Get it out of your system. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I'd rather not beat around the bush. We were dealing with a monster in my small town, and since everybody thought it was some wild animal, the hunt for the beast became my burden. It was a coyote or a bear, or one of the last mountain lions left in the area. That's what everybody told me. I didn't particularly want to deal with any of those animals, but who else was going to do it? They'd all succumb to the same tranquilizer used on the Rottweilers and Mastiffs, wouldn't they? I packed up my stuff, filled my van with a fresh tank of gas, and started looking for the thing I didn't want to find. I'm good at my job, remember? That means, unfortunately, I found that monster after all. I found it pulling a garbage bag out of a dumpster, dragging the shiny black plastic across the pavement, while paper cups and sandwich scraps spilled out of the seams. It wouldn't have been an uncommon sight. I'd seen dogs in the same position, if it wasn't for the size of the thing. An animal gets close to the size of a human being. You start getting nervous. When it's bigger than a human being, you get outright afraid. When it dwarfs you completely, like this creature did that night, your blood freezes in your veins. I wasn't supposed to be hunting something like this. I'm a dog catcher, not a monster hunter. But there I was. illuminating the scene with the spotlight attached to my driver's side mirror. It was easily twice my size. Its hair was short and curly, covering it from snout to tail, and its eyes were wide, forward-facing, and full of venom. It didn't like the light, I guess. It turned at me and glared. Its limbs didn't bend quite like a dog's. They were long and folded up kind of like a person's would. Anatomically, as far as its shape was concerned, the beast looked more like a man pretending to be a dog. A giant man, maybe. A giant man with sharp canine teeth and clawed fingers. Thick strands of spit ran from its mouth and snot bubbled around its nose. It wasn't sick, I don't think. It was just hungry, drooling as it made its way through its meal of trash. I interrupted that meal. I should have known better. By the time it turned toward me, I was already outside of the van. I had opened my driver's side door, rolled down the window, and I was using the empty frame to steady the barrel of my rifle. It was loaded with a dart that would knock the creature on its rear end. It would be snoring within minutes. I didn't want to stand around and wait for it to attack, so I fired that rifle and I hit my mark. It didn't go down. It came at me. I fired again, hit it again, and failed to slow it down for a second time. I had just cleared the doorway, jumped into the van and pulled my legs into the cab, when the creature slammed into the open door. It crashed shut, and I heard the beast's claws skittering on the pavement outside. I had already retreated into the passenger seat. I could afford to sit by that open window, offering my neck or my shoulder to that beast's gnashing teeth. I couldn't roll the window up either, not without ducking under the opening and praying that it wouldn't see me. It burst through the open window, and its shoulders got stuck in the frame. Its head lurched forward, one push at a time. Bite by bite, chewing on the air, it inched closer to me. Soon, its yellow teeth were going to be sinking into my skin. I kicked it when I could, pummeling it with my heels. It was knocked back a few times, flinging strands of spit all around the interior. When it slumped to the side and hit the van's horn, the creature yowled. It scurried backward, jerking out of the window with a loud plop. I guessed what to do next and jumped for the horn, laying on it and watching the beast run. It must have had a good pair of ears for sound to hurt like that. Either way, I was thankful, but I hadn't done my job. I made a recommendation. The next night, I wanted the community to create as much ruckus as they could. A few of us honked our horns into the late hours of the night. Others blasted music and few set off fireworks that weren't exactly legal. We didn't see the creature leave town, but we also never saw it again. I'm a dog catcher, right? That thing wasn't any type of dog that I'd ever seen, and chasing it away was the best that I could do. Man, that night was something else, I'll tell you. The whole town pulled together like one big team, united by the shared terror of that beast. I guess fear is one way to bring folks together, huh? After that night of noise and chaos, the creature vanished from our town, but the experience lingered on in our minds. People started to treat each other a bit differently, with more understanding, knowing that we had all faced the same fear. As for me, well, I went back to my regular duties, chasing down stray dogs and making sure they got back to their owners safe and sound. But every once in a while, I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, or hear a rustle in the bushes, and my heart would skip a beat. The memory of that creature's yellow teeth and that ungodly yowl was etched in my mind, always ready to remind me of the terror I had faced. I'm coming to you from upstate Massachusetts. I've had an ongoing experience over the past couple of months that I think is right up your alley. I'm a gardener, and due to the area I live in, I usually work for some very rich people. I'll usually work for the same estate or mansion for as long as they'll have me. It's more predictable than you'd think, honestly. My last job before this one lasted 8 years, but my boss moved down south and sold off his mansion. I got sacked during the off-season, so no one was really hiring. When I found a job at a new estate, I honestly felt pretty lucky. When I first got hired, I was told that the only people who lived at the estate were a couple in their 30s. The home had been passed down on the husband's side, and it was plopped in the middle of nowhere. They couldn't rent it out because it was too far from the ocean or any attractions. They didn't have any pets or kids. It was just the couple, Mr. and Mrs. Davis, and US staff members. The first problem was that they didn't have enough staff for the place. The Davises' garden was big enough that it could have used 5 gardeners for the upkeep, but they only hired 2 of us. Normally, I would have taken that as a red flag, but like I said, I needed the money. I started in the fall, so I was thrown headfirst into planting season. I spent most of those first few weeks just getting rid of the dead trees that had overtaken the place. It's normal for a landscaper to miss a tree or two, but it was like the whole garden had died. The garden hadn't been properly taken care of in years, and a lot of the estate was like that too. Some areas of the house had been straight up abandoned. We had our staff quarters out back, and those were fine, but the rest of it? Half of the rooms in the main house looked like they hadn't been touched for decades. One night, I asked the chef about it, since he had been on staff the longest. I thought maybe the house had been someone's 3rd or 4th home, and they had stopped caring about it because no one actually lived here. But he said the house had been the main home for Mr. Davis's family since he'd been born. Things didn't start going downhill until about 6 months before I was hired. Most of the staff assumed that the money was running out. That was the easiest way to explain such a drastic shift. I believed that explanation too, until one night I stayed out in the garden after dark. I wanted to finish building some plant beds so that I could be done for the week. That way I could spend a few days in the nearest town and see if there was any last-minute work there. I was by myself, at the back of the gardens, and I was working right at the edge of the forest line. My flashlight died. Before I could head for the house, I felt someone pressing down on my shoulder. A blast of cold air rushed through me. It was so frigid that it gave me the shakes. I heard a pair of footsteps walking away from me, toward the main house. Now it was dark out, but between the moon and the lights from the mansion, I could see a little bit, and I knew there was no one out there except me. But I could hear those footsteps. It was unmistakable. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. I grabbed my tools and headed back to the staff quarters as fast as I could. I was trying not to make too big a deal out of it, but I was shaken up. I knew what I felt. That was only the first time I felt the presence of something else. Over the next few weeks, it kept happening. Something happened every couple of days. I started keeping a journal to record my experiences, just so I would know I wasn't crazy. Usually I would be working in the garden or alone in the kitchen, but it didn't really matter. The pattern was the same. The nearest light source would go out. I'd feel someone touching me, like my elbow or a pat on the back, as if they were asking me to move over. Then, a blast of cold. It felt like instant hypothermia. After the 4th or 5th time, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked the other gardener, Jeff, if anything weird had happened to him, and at first he laughed it off like nothing was wrong. I thought maybe I was the only one, but the next time it happened, we were together, and he felt it too. Apparently, this thing had been freaking Jeff out at the same time it started visiting me. He just didn't want me to think he was crazy. I asked the other staff members and tried to be discreet about it. 2 of the housekeepers, plus the chef, also felt that strange presence. We started working in pairs to make sure no one was ever alone. We didn't know what this thing was or what it could do after all. It slowed down everyone's productivity, but the Davises either didn't notice or didn't care. One of the housekeepers found a new job and booked it out of here. The rest of us are only sticking it out because we don't have anywhere else to go. It's not like the presence or spirit or whatever it is has really tried to hurt us. But Jeff thinks that if it's a ghost, it's only a matter of time before things escalate. We'll see. I'm trying to find work before the new year because I don't know how much longer I can take this. If things do get worse, or the spirit becomes more active, I'll get back in touch to let you know. I hope it doesn't come to that, but I'm sure that you and your listeners would be interested in a follow-up. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it.